Hello, I'm Dapper Dan Gavosden, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, which definitely count.
And I'm mischievous Mark Ginocchio, and I own every issue of Amazing Spider-Man, including the annuals, but the annuals don't count.
Well, thanks everybody for joining us for our 9th episode of Season 5 of The Amazing Spider Talk, the show where two fans and collectors uncover the strange, fun, fascinating, and dramatic history of the Spider-Man comic universe. And it has been especially dramatic on this show after our last episode about the Hobgoblin.
Absolutely, Dan. Drama, drama, drama. If you want to swing along with us on our journey through Spidey's past, present, and future, subscribe to Amazing Spider Talk on your favorite podcast app. Every other week, we put out a mainline episode of our flagship show, and sprinkled in between, we review new comics as well as interview some of the greatest Spider-Man creators of yesterday and today. This is the perfect time to start listening.
I will say, though, Mark, it's not absolutely the most perfect because on our Apple Podcasts app, not every one of our episodes is available anymore. So as I've been saying, if you want to listen to our full catalog, you're going to have to go to amazingspidertalk.com, where we have all of our Superior Spider-Man episodes available and the beginning of Amazing Spider Talk there. We can only have up to 300 episodes on Apple, and we've surpassed that now. So if you're one of those people that is a completionist, boom, go over to amazingspidertalk.com, and there you go. You can get all of the episodes that we've ever done of the show.
Dan, you and I know nothing about completionists, right?
Consider every episode that's not in our Apple Podcast feed an Amazing Fantasy 15 of our collection, in that we will never own it, I don't think.
Or an annual, Dan.
Oh, no.
Boom.
Oh, no. Well, anyway, let's get to today's episode. In this season of the all-new Amazing Spider Talk, we're going back to the mid-'80s when comics were changing, embracing new visual styles, aging up with their audience, and ditching formulas that had defined serialized superhero comics for decades. In the previous episode, which would be hard to forget, it was one of our favorites we've ever done, we've discussed the drama behind the bungled initial reveal of the Hobgoblin's identity. Mark, I said initial reveal of the Hobgoblin's identity.
That's right. Every story needs a good ending, Dan, and no content. Let me start that again. I'm sorry. Every story needs a good ending, Dan, and not content to let Ned Leeds be blamed for the crimes of the Hobgoblin, writer Roger Stern came back almost a decade later to right the wrongs of his predecessors. That's right. We're not in the 80s anymore, Dan. We're actually going to be in the 90s today. Stern teamed up with Ron Frenz, the person who was part of the 80s Hobgoblin storyline, to release Hobgoblin Lives, a miniseries, to finally give the character the ending he had long planned since the very beginning when he first introduced him in Amazing Spider-Man 238.
This is it. It's all coming full circle. So if you want to follow along with us through our journey through the second Hobgoblin identity reveal, I mean, how many people get a second identity reveal? If you even want to call that, I think we've had a half dozen identity reveals for the Hobgoblin on this show and in the comics. We're going to be discussing specifically today the events of Hobgoblin Lives, numbers 1 through 3, and the shortly followed up story of Goblins at the Gate, which ran in Spectacular Spider-Man, numbers 259 to 261. Also, kind of finishing up our Roger Stern Hobgoblin stories. And we'll discuss some of the stuff that the Hobgoblin has done since then. But since this is our Roger Stern season, that's really where most of his influence on the character concluded in that issue 261 of Spectacular Spider-Man.
Absolutely, Dan. But before we get into Stern righting the wrongs, why don't we talk a little bit about where the Hobgoblin was after the end of where we ended our last episode, which was Amazing Spider-Man 289.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's no guess to say that I think general consensus was that this reveal was kind of I don't know if a failure is too strong of a word, but a big mess. And if you'd been following for all the years that it had been going on, I think there's no way that you got to this point and really felt all that satisfied about it. And, Jim Salicrup, the editor at the time, agreed, and he decided, man, it's time to bury the Hobgoblin for a little bit of time. And that's kind of what he did.
Yeah, so the Hobgoblin was kind of put on the back burner, but all the same, Jason Massendale, aka the Jack-O-Lantern, had assumed the mantle of the Hobgoblin in Amazing Spider-Man number 289, and then thereafter in the wake of Ned Leeds' death. With the character on ice for a bit, he did finally get pushed forward again in Amazing Spider-Man number 312, which one of the many iconic Todd McFarlane covers of the era, which was like the Hobgoblin versus the Harry Osborn Green Goblin, but it was also part of the Inferno crossover. And what happened to Massendale's Hobgoblin during Inferno, Dan?
I mean, the Inferno crossover is really strange. Like MJ's gold necklace comes to life and tries to strangle her to death. And I'll admit, I've never been a huge fan of McFarlane's Goblin renditions, although they're very Ditko-esque in their kind of strange design. But the Inferno crossover saw all these kind of demons coming to Earth and taking over. And in issue 312 of Amazing Spider-Man, Hobgoblin and the Green Goblin finally fight each other. Although it's Harry Osborn as the Green Goblin, acting almost like a hero there.
Yeah.
But the Hobgoblin loses because it's Jason Massendale, and he doesn't have the power of the Green Goblin. He's never taken that serum, so he's desperate for the serum. So in Spectacular issue 147, you get the scene where Massendale approaches one of the lead demons of this invasion of Earth, begging him for power and offering his soul to him. And the demon kind of laughs it off. He's like, have you seen the state of your soul recently? It's not great, and then kind of curses him, which I guess gives him kind of what he wants, but he becomes, in that issue, it's not named, but he becomes the Demo-Goblin, which is he kind of becomes like a goblin, right?
Yes.
He's a demon. He's got these cursed reptile eyes and snake-like tongue, and he's all kinds of creepy. I think this character is kind of best known for his involvement in Maximum Carnage and his kind of team up with the doppelganger Spider-Man. So, that's probably his claim to fame. But yeah, I mean, for a while there, the Hobgoblin was replaced by the Demo-Goblin, which then became its own thing, separate from the Hobgoblin. And it's a whole twisted thing I'm sure we'll get into in a later season when we do a bad guys report. But the Demo-Goblin, Spectacular Spider-Man 147.
Yeah, you're just previewing our 90s villains episodes, Dan, which are going to be really lit.
Oh my God. I can't wait.
I'm going to need extra beers for those episodes. But eventually Massendale would reassume his human form, although he had cybernetic features because, comic books, everybody, this is where we're at. And that kind of brings us into the mid 90s when Roger Stern apparently was kicking around an idea he had in the back offices. I mean, Stern had left Marvel for a period. He was actually writing Superman. He worked a lot on the Death and Return of Superman arc in the 90s for the Distinguished Competition. But this was one of the storylines that was going to bring Stern back to Marvel. And what was Stern kind of pitching about, Dan?
Well, his whole thing was he was hung up on this storyline. It was a really personal one to him that he wanted to see through to fruition, even if he left to go do Avengers. His thing was that it still seemed incredibly out of character to him for Ned Leeds to be the Hobgoblin, which fair enough, Stern, we agree. It is out of character for Ned Leeds to be the Hobgoblin. His whole thing was look, the Hobgoblin was a killer, and he didn't think that Ned Leeds was a killer. And also, if Ned Leeds was the Hobgoblin, how could someone with his super strength get turfed by the Foreigner's men so easily? He just thought it was a cold case waiting to be solved. And he would be the guy to do it because, of course, he invented the character. So why not? And he would bring up these points when he did his occasional interviews. I mean, we're a case in point that Stern doesn't do a lot of interviews because we can't get him on our show. But he would pitch this idea around casually, and even to Marvel. So how did Marvel respond to this idea that he had been throwing around?
Yeah, I mean, like, Marvel for the most part was kind of cool to it. I mean, they were like, why are we going to revisit this? I mean, this is a story now. I mean, at this point was nearly 10 years old. Yes, Stern had his personal connection to it, but like, did the average fan truly care at this point? Not only was, Ned Leeds dead, but, we had the new Hobgoblin who had demonic powers and was hanging out with Carnage and Shriek and, far more marketable characters. I mean, like, why are we going back to this? But, 1996 was kind of a strange time for Marvel all around. There were financial issues. There was, in terms of the Spider Office, we were kind of coming out of the Clone Saga and trying to kind of rebuild the brand of Spider-Man a little bit. And, one of the things that that Marvel was doing to that end was they really wanted to kind of go back in time and mine like the glory days of Spider-Man, and the best way that they did that was actually through the Untold Tales of Spider-Man series, which was the kind of the brainchild of Kurt Busiek and Tom Brevoort, who was the editor of Untold Tales. So in that context, with Stern kind of still pitching this idea, Brevoort was like, okay, we're doing Untold Tales, and maybe the time is right to do something like this. And one of the other editors/writers who was kicking around the Spider books at that point was Glenn Greenberg, and he was all about it. Like his general attitude was like, hey man, like we get to do a good story, and we get Roger Stern back on Spider-Man. If it sells, it sells, but like this is a great idea. So Greenberg kind of took over as the creative force from an editorial perspective behind it, while Brevoort kind of took a back seat. And what happened from there, Dan?
Yeah, so the big thing was they needed to run it up the chain to see if they could get it approved. And so that up the chain for them meant talking to editor Ralph Macchio. Not the guy from the Karate Kid. It's a separate guy. It's not that Ralph Macchio.
But they refer to him as the Karate Kid.
Yeah. I mean, look, they would try to blur those lines as much as possible. But if there's another person in pop culture named Ralph Macchio, who's not the actor, but he was a high up editor at Marvel, I believe even EIC at one point.
The 90s were a wacky time, Dan, so that might have been the case, but he definitely oversaw the spy, and he was also the main editor on the Ultimate books when they started, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so they needed to run it up the chain, and because the thing was that like Ralph Macchio had introduced this new Hobgoblin recently in the comics, and so Glenn Greenberg wanted to find out like, hey, like if I go out to Stern and he wants to kill off that Hobgoblin to do his real Hobgoblin story, like I don't want to piss off Ralph Macchio. So he ran it up the chain and said like, hey, look, if this means killing off your new Hobgoblin, are you okay with that? And he said, well, the new Hobgoblin isn't working anyway, so I'm cool with it. But he had a few stipulations that he wanted in the story before he could greenlight it. So first of all, Macchio said he wouldn't sign off on the story unless he knew who the Hobgoblin is and how Stern planned to get to the reveal, which is funny because that's kind of the long-standing request of all these editors, but this was going to be it, right? Like they were going to nail this thing to the board or whatever. Like they had to know where this was going, and it had to be something Ralph Macchio could sign off on. And ultimately he agreed, with who it would be, Roderick Kingsley, and the way it would get there. And anybody who's read the story knows that it's done very artfully. But the one thing he insisted, and I think this is actually really great that he insisted this because it brings a lot of heart to the story, that I imagine, someone as talented as Stern would probably have seized upon. But Macchio insisted that it had to be a big story for Betty Brant because it was going to exonerate Ned Leeds, her ex-husband, and he saw it as a real opportunity to make that character, kind of refresh that character a little bit and give her a big moment. Not that she deserved it. Betty Brant is an awful person, but here she does kind of redeem herself a little bit.
She's an awful person because she was written awfully, Dan.
It's true. It's true. It's true. Well, here she's written not awfully, and
right.
I think that was Macchio's contribution, and really appreciate it.
Dan, before we go any further, I think for the first time in the history of the Amazing Spider Talk, I have an appropriate opening to do my Ralph Macchio imitation from Karate Kid 3.
Oh, boy.
Not. So let me just get it out there. Mr. Miyagi! Because he's 30-something years old playing a 17-year-old. Anyway, I digress.
How many years has it been since we've revisited that inside joke on this show?
I don't know, Dan, but here we are. And Cobra Kai is like in the zeitgeist now, so like people are probably listening and being like, "Wow, why are you being mean to Ralph Macchio, the Karate Kid?" Mark. Anyway, just go back and watch Karate Kid 3. It doesn't age well, no matter how well they use the characters in Cobra Kai. Anyway,
producers, call Mark for his impression. He needs to be hired for this.
There we go. But so there was, I don't want to call it a condition, but in terms of like one last piece to get. The last piece of the puzzle for this Hobgoblin story was, of course, the artist. And Greenberg actually was really pushing to get John Romita Jr. To come back, but that was not going to happen. I guess JR had some other projects going on, or
I believe he was working for DC at the time, if I'm not correct.
I thought that he didn't go to DC until only a few years ago, but whatever. I'm sure. JR in the 90s was doing everything. You know what I mean? Like, and he was not on the table at the time, regardless. Greenberg recruited Ron Frenz, and Dan, you asked Ron about this when you first interviewed him way back in the day, in terms of one of those episodes that you probably cannot find in our podcast feed right now because it's from the Superior era. But what was Ron's impression at the time?
I mean, Ron has long said that he was skeptical of the idea of the twins, right, or the non-twin twins.
Right, right.
And he was skeptical.
I believe his quote is, "Come on, Roger."
I mean, he was skeptical at all, I think, even just revisiting the Hobgoblin, because for him it had been put to rest. And you got to imagine it was kind of a painful chapter in Ron's, career as an artist, in the regard that, like, bickering over this thing was ultimately, I think, what got him and Tom booted from the book. And I'm not blaming Ron in any way. I don't think it was his fault at all. But, Glenn Greenberg was really stubborn about it and eventually convinced Ron that he was the right guy for the book. Ron joked when he was on the show that, like, he felt like a bad replacement for JR, in that JR is who he is. But, I mean, Ron Frenz is who he is, and he's a legend as much as he would claim otherwise. And I think he's a perfect fit for this book. And Glenn Greenberg was so convinced of this, he said if Ron Frenz wasn't going to be on the book after JR wasn't available, that he would walk himself from the project, which is a lot of conviction. And, I think was a worthwhile suggestion, because I think the book we got is really beautiful looking.
Yeah, definitely. So, of course, that book is Hobgoblin Lives. It's a 3-part miniseries. So it was scripted by Stern with art by Frenz, and plus a variety of inkers, including George Perez, who was this Perez's first Spider-Man book? It might have been. Obviously Perez is a legend himself. And other inkers included Scott Hanna, Bob McLeod, Jerome Moore. I mean, guys that have been, around the Spidey circuit for sure.
Yeah, this is George Perez's, like, one of his few works on Spider-Man, and he only does the first issue, but it really stands out. I mean, I don't think I've ever seen Ron Frenz inked in this way, and it's a really interesting look for the book, which we can talk about later. But it is a little weird that the inking is so inconsistent on this chapter, but you get really three distinct interpretations of Ron Frenz's pencils, and you know, at least in a modern context, I'm used to seeing Ron Frenz's pencils inked by Sal Buscema, and you know,
Hmm.
seeing them done this way is it's kind of a reminder of like how much a person's pencils can be stretched, and how like you know, honestly, I think this is some of the most modern looking work that Ron Frenz has done. I mean, it's really strong stuff.
Yeah. And of course, the book also had a checklist at the start to kind of get newcomers all caught up with all of the previous drama. I mean, couldn't they have just listened to Amazing Spider Talk at the time, Dan? I mean, that would have gotten them all the way caught up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'll be honest. Like you know, these checklists at the beginning of the book were kind of what got me so obsessed with the Hobgoblin story. You know, because like
Yeah.
I didn't live through this, but then seeing that these Hobgoblins lives issues like really just pulled from all these different places showcased to me early on, like just the web of information that we were dealing with here. And you know, I kind of like this like as the sort of like pseudo editor's note, but like before the issues start. I love this kind of thing, and I feel like there's a welcome place for this. You know, I just think back to this era in the '90s where there were like the character portraits on the inside cover.
Right.
It was a really distinct time for opening pages.
Could you imagine opening up a issue of Sinister War and seeing the checklist being like the Osborne journals and Sins Past? Like, wait, what? What am I about to
Yeah,
read?
no kidding, no kidding. Man, the Osborne journals. I haven't revisited those in forever.
The legacy of evil. As we mentioned, of course, in addition to redeeming Ned Leeds, Stern was also going to use the book to kind of redeem Betty Brant's character, or to in Dan's opinion, I don't know if she's redeemed, but she's less awful here. And I also thought it was interesting, like in the very first issue, one of the big plot points was that the returning Hobgoblin kills off Massendale. So we take him off the board, and we kind of know from this point on, like, all right, we're gonna get a truly new Hobgoblin here. We're not gonna get faked out, and it's gonna be Massendale. So I thought that was a pretty significant move to really prove like this was gonna be a definitive story here.
It's great too. I mean, because like Massendale, you know, mouths off to the press in order to like delay his time in court, where he's going to get like the death sentence or whatever equivalent in the Marvel universe. That he was never the Hobgoblin, you know, until later on, and it's like it's a great way to reintroduce this kind of mystery back into the universe. Like, why would he have kept the secret for so long? Well, he was, you know, holding on to it to use it at this time, and I just think it's really clever scripting from Stern, which goes without saying, I think. And yeah, I don't know. It's very Massendale, and to see him taken out this way is perfect too. I love Massendale as a villain. I know he's not like a great replacement for the Hobgoblin, but he's got some like real verve to him that I really enjoy.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. And now, of course, the other big thing that came from this series was, the mechanics of, how were they going to explain away that Ned Leeds was not the Hobgoblin? I mean, this would become a core part of the character's biography going forward, which was that what Stern was actually trying to demonstrate here was that the Hobgoblin, the real Hobgoblin, brainwashed Ned Leeds into believing he was the Hobgoblin, and until basically he no longer had any use for him. And what Stern had said in retrospect that was kind of the precedent for this was, go all the way back to, what was it, Amazing Spider-Man 246, 247, one of those issues there, when Lefty Donovan is initially revealed to be the Hobgoblin, and then of course that's not the case, and it was because the Hobgoblin kind of tricked Lefty into believing that he was the character. So like we're immediately going back to actual content that Stern had scripted back in the 80s, to kind of demonstrate what this like little mechanical Deus Machina was going to be, and it was pretty effective in that regard, right, Dan? I mean, yes, we don't always love today how it's kind of like fake out upon fake out, but and we can get to that a little later. But like at the time, it was like, oh, okay, we there's a precedent here for brainwashing, and we saw it. So good for Stern for calling it back.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always love the scene where like Spider-Man kind of comes to the realization that like the pieces have been sitting there in front of him the whole time. It's this kind of intimate scene with him and Mary Jane in the bedroom, and they're embracing, and she's like, well, wait, like if he had taken the Goblin serum, wouldn't he have been able to like make mincemeat of, the foreigners' goons? And it's just a great moment, and Peter has this almost like flashes before his eyes of, wait a minute, you're right, none of this does make sense. And it's a great example of like I think like Spider-Man being smart and thinking about his rogues gallery, but also like how you can use Mary Jane to play off of him in an interesting way. I just always liked the way that this scene was handled. It's one of those like, hey, you all accepted this for a decade, but really it was all right there in front of you. How come you didn't see this grievous error that is both shared between Peter and the audience? And
Right.
It's a favorite of mine.
Now, of course, the other thing that this story does is it brings back Roderick Kingsley, who and correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but I think like the last time we saw him, we talked about this in our last episode, he got shot, right? This is really the first appearance of Roderick in over 10 years. And, you can, like, yes, it's easy for us to kind of piece this all together, but I would have to imagine if you were reading this in real time, you'd be like, wait, why the hell is this guy being brought back? He's clearly part of it, right? I mean, like, and yes, of course, Roderick Kingsley was Stern's creation from the get-go, going back to his first run on Spectacular in the early '80s. But still, like, if you're not getting like bells and whistles and alarms from Roderick showing up, you're not paying attention. But of course, we try and get the fake out here from Stern in showing Roderick interacting with a masked hobgoblin. So it's kind of like, okay, what's that about? If he's the hobgoblin, how is he talking to the actual hobgoblin?
I mean, it's still the same fake out as it was before, which is like Roderick is portrayed as the weapons dealer for the hobgoblin, but I mean, obviously, looking back on it, like all that stuff is probably Daniel Kingsley wearing a toupee, which we'll get to. But yeah, I mean, he's still continuing that. I mean, the no prize there if it's not going to be Roderick in the story. Like it's, I don't think it's quite the instance of like Scooby-Doo, where of course you only meet one other character, so of course he's going to be the ghost.
Right.
Like, of course it's the old man. He's the only person we've met.
Right.
Like, I don't think that's quite true as true here. But yeah, I mean, Roderick coming back out of like after whatever 7 years away, it is a bit of a red flag.
Yeah. So of course, as you mentioned, the reveal is eventually made, and it is not. It's that while the hobgoblin is out carousing, Roderick's not twin, but very similar looking brother Daniel is kind of posing as Roderick with the help of a hairpiece, and Roderick is eventually apprehended as the hobgoblin and put in jail, and we never hear from him again. Right? I mean, that's it. It's all over. The end of the hobgoblin. Stern did it. We got
him. and going back to even our first discussion of Roger Stern at the end of our previous season, where we talked about the introduction of Roderick Kingsley, I think this reveal ultimately suggests too that the difference in the characterization for that character. I think we talked about him as being kind of like a poorly written gay stereotype. in those stories, which I don't necessarily love that characterization, but I think like this story also seems to imply that that was Daniel as well.
Yeah.
With Roderick kind of manipulating things behind the scenes. So, you can trace this almost as far back as like Stern's spectacular Spider-Man run if you really want to.
Definitely. So Dan, with Roderick behind bars, what did you think about the actual execution of Hobgoblin Lives?
I mean, I think it's brilliant. I think this book is so cleverly written, because it'd be very easy for this thing to just kind of be like another chapter in it, that feels like a book out of time. Like let's flash back, or the opposite, right? A book that's happening now, but you don't really care about it because you've long since forgotten those events and it was put to rest. But I really think that this is kind of a thrilling conclusion to this story. It makes it like pertinent to Spider-Man now, like, which means Stern had been keeping up and made it very contemporary. But I think it manages to take the threat of the Hobgoblin and make it not feel like something that we're just drudging up from yesteryear. It feels, very modern. And not only that, but like there's no T that's not crossed or I that's not dotted. I mean, he dodges and weaves through every bizarre complication that this story took that we detailed in our last episode. Even those crazy Jim Owsley Web of Spider-Man stories are explained here in a way that doesn't feel like a crazy exposition dump. It's just masterfully done. And I think this book could have failed any number of ways, and it doesn't. It succeeds in every number of way, in my opinion. Whether that be the art team, the writing team, etc. I think this is the thing, at least for me, that redeems the character of the Hobgoblin. And I have to think that Stern felt a great pressure to do so and, put extra care into delivering on this one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Frenz's exact words was like, he did it. He really did it. And I agree with that. I mean, like he Stern pulls this off here. I mean, it also, I mean, not to Monday morning quarterback it, but frankly, that's all this is for us when it comes to the Hobgoblin. But like, it kind of demonstrates why maybe doing these long drawn out storylines is not what's best for the narrative sometimes. Like if you can just do a kind of neat and tidy multi-part arc that brings it all up and explains it away. I mean, like if Stern basically did this in 249 to 251, we would never have had the drama that was that followed his exit from the book. You know what I mean? Like he could have just done this story and it would have been, it would have been great. But instead we were kind of stuck with what we got. So it does kind of like, I don't know, to me kind of put forward the idea with some of these creators that, I know we like to play the long game with characters and with storylines, but maybe sometimes you just need a nice, condensed, concise story to get your mysteries out there, because otherwise there's too much possibility and potential for it to go off the rails, as we saw with the Hobgoblin.
I want to push back on that a little bit, but I'm going to save it for later in the episode, because I want to talk about our Slack right now. So, Mark, why don't you tell our listeners about how they can get engaged with our Slack?
Absolutely. Well, hundreds of listeners like you hang out in our community of Spider-Man fans on the Slack. The amazing Spider Slack community is absolutely free to join, and you can jump into active conversations with awesome people about collecting, conventions, movies, new comics, old comics, and more.
Yeah, I'm there all the time. And this week, Mark, you know what? I've been picking fights with anyone who is 40 years old and thinks they know more about comics than me. If you hear me out there, everybody, come on into the Slack Fight Club. Let's go. I'm ready to throw down. You think you know something about Ned Leeds? Let's do it. I'm ready to go.
I mean, as a member of the 40 club, what is about 40-year-olds that you're fighting against right now?
Oh, I don't know. These random 40-year-olds seem to be suggesting they know more about comics than me in my local comic book stores, and I'm just not taking it. Like age is just a number, man. But that doesn't mean you know everything about Ned Leeds. I'm ready to throw down. You step into my Slack, Let's go.
All right, all right. Dan is throwing down the gauntlet.
Yeah,
There we
yeah. So
go.
let that be an invitation to join our awesome Spider-Man community. Just follow the link in the description and be sure to say hi. And once you're there, let me know where I can send the pain because I'm going to bring it, Mark. I'm going to bring it.
I mean, Dan, I've never heard such threatening words from anybody. From you saying, "I'm going to bring the pain," like I just got shivers down my spine. I mean, it looked like I was yawning on camera there, but it was shivers. That's what that was. That was me emitting shivers.
Well, good, good. You should be intimidated. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm going scorched earth here. All right. So, all right, let's get back to the conversation before I get too riled up.
All right. Well, coming immediately on the heels of the Hobgoblin Lives, Dan, is Goblins at the Gate, as you had mentioned in our intro. So, Goblins at the Gate was an arc to follow in Spectacular Spider-Man number 259 to 261. Greenberg and Roger Stern worked the scripts on that. The art was Luke Ross and Al Milgrom. Of course, Ralph Macchio, or Macchio, or Karate Kid, he's editing it. And basically, like this was kind of like Greenberg wanting to, now that the Hobgoblin world was set right, he was like, "Hey, we got the Hobgoblin, and Norman Osborn is back in the Marvel universe. You know, after hanging out in Europe for 20 years, he's back and orchestrating the Clone Saga, and doing shit with." Oh, excuse me, doing stuff with Harry Osborn, and it's just a good old time for Norman. So let's get a Hobgoblin versus Green Goblin proper storyline. So this is the dream match. What did you think about the dream match, Dan?
I think it's okay.
Okay.
I think it's okay. I mean, this feels more like a. I mean, it's funny because it's technically the end of Roger Stern writing the Hobgoblin, but it really just feels kind of like something fun that they wanted to do. But I still don't
Yeah.
ever feel like it really gets to be all that fun. Like it's kind of mired in like '90s Green Goblin continuity, which
Yes.
is neat. But it's like you never get that full like Norman Green Goblin craziness thing because he's still kind of putting up a front at the time. And so I don't feel like the story ever really lives up to the potential. I mean, Roger had mentioned to Glenn Greenberg when he was doing Hobgoblin Lives that like this was a dream project of his. And like this thing kind of seemed to have fallen like into their lap because at the time Spectacular Spider-Man lost JMD as a writer, and so they needed a new writer. And Ralph Macchio actually reached out to Glenn Greenberg and was like, "We have to put solicits out to advertise upcoming books. Do you have any ideas?" And this was just kind of something that like Glenn Greenberg like called up Stern and was like, "Well, hey, do you want to do this? Like, we have 3 issues we need to fill in for." And so they just kind of wrote solicits up before they even had a story in mind. And he went back to Macchio. Macchio was like, "Yeah, let's do it." And so you get this story kind of, I wouldn't say cobbled together, but it's just a 3 issue kind of fun tale sandwiched in between while the Spider Office figured out what to do, in the wake of JMD's departure. So I don't know. To me, it feels kind of like of that nature, which is not like this is not a story that anybody had like been thinking about for a long time. It's a fun matchup between these characters that Stern and Greenberg thought they could have a good time with.
Yeah, and the general premise is that Kingsley is in jail, kind of, stewing away about being caught, and he sees Norman Osborn out there, kind of like as you mentioned, putting up this front that he was never the Green Goblin and he's a legitimate businessman, and Kingsley is basically like itching to rat out Norman since obviously he got all of his tech from Norman's lair back in the day. So Kingsley reaches out to the DA to be like, "Hey, let's cut a deal. I can give you proof that Norman Osborn is the Green Goblin for in exchange for a lesser sentence here." And of course, Osborn, ever the opportunist, does not go for that. Instead, he's like, "No, no. And he actually breaks Kingsley out to threaten him, I guess. I mean, it's kind of like, oh, okay. I mean, this is how we're gonna make this happen. I mean, it's a little mechanically off. But
I mean, it's important to
and
note that he breaks him out via like an alternate Green Goblin. He
right.
like hires someone, or at the time, at least we suspect that he hired someone to dress up as the Green Goblin so that he can appear alongside him and prove definitively that he's not the Green Goblin.
Yeah, and what's interesting, so I had a conversation with Glenn Greenberg back in the day, and he had mentioned to me, and I'm sure he's mentioned this in other interviews, that one of his big regrets in working on this story was that he never um, identified who that mystery goblin was, and he wanted to. I mean, here we go, it's another mystery character, and Greenberg's idea was that he was going to have Phil Urich be the Goblin, and I find that personally interesting because fast forward to the Dan Slott big time era, and Phil Urich, of course, is the character. Well, in addition to being Ben Urich's nephew, he is the character who kills who we think is Roderick Kingsley at the time, but it's actually Daniel Kingsley, and assumes the mantle of the Hobgoblin during the big time era. So it's kind of a weird full circle of these characters here.
I mean, hey, if you're a character in a Spider-Man book, if you live long enough, you'll see yourself become the Hobgoblin. I mean, I think that's the ultimate path. We didn't get Betty Brant as the Hobgoblin, but Lord knows we go long enough, we would get there. Although ultimately, this character, this alternate Green Goblin, ended up being the Green Goblin construct, which is a whole other bag of worms. Mark, do you remember the Green Goblin construct?
No, you're gonna have to refresh my memory on this one,
I
Dan.
won't
This
go
sounds
too
very
deep into
extra
it.
90s-ish.
Yeah, it's like a Green Goblin clone. It's the best way to really put it, that like Norman had created to pull off things like this, and it
Right.
ultimately like ends up melting down. It's like a whole other thing. And you know what, guys? This is all to say, look forward to our 90s coverage where
Oh,
everyone is confused while talking about comics.
I can't wait for the 90s because you're gonna have a child. Should I not say that? Sorry.
No, that's totally fine. I will have a child in the 90s.
Well, no, I'm like, wait, is that public knowledge or not? Let me start that again. I'm sorry. Um, I'm looking forward to our 90s coverage, Dan, because you'll be sleep deprived with a child, and we're going to be talking about some insane stuff. So, including the Goblin construct, clearly. What I also found kind of funny about the end of Goblins at the Gate is, we initially kind of end this story thinking that Norman is on top. Kingsley is kind of, you know, basically, Osborn assumes his business interest, or however you want to word it. But actually, Kingsley kind of outsmarts Norman, steals some money from a Swiss bank account from him, and is off in a on an island in the Caribbean by himself, kind of living the high life and contemplating the need to ever be the Hobgoblin again. And we never heard from him again, right?
I mean, for a long time, that was true. Like
Yeah.
almost 20 years, I would say. Is that right? 20 years, just about.
I mean, big time, right? That was when he was brought back.
Yeah, I think that's the first time. And he was exactly where we left him, on that beach, drinking some margaritas or whatever it
Yes.
was.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, Mark, what are your thoughts on Goblin at the Gate? I mean,
I
do you
mean,
agree with me
yeah,
largely?
yeah. I mean, it's nothing revelatory. I mean, especially in light of the quality that was Hobgoblin Lives. But like, I think given where the books were at the time, and kind of, in as you alluded to earlier, I mean, like, you know, this was the Spider Office was kind of in a spot in terms of, like, filling the gaps and stuff like that. So like, I think for like a random fill in the gap story, it's fun. Like, there's no harm being done here, and I think that it kind of I do appreciate that it does kind of put a bow on the Kingsley saga on Spider-Man, and it also gives you that kind of Green Goblin Hobgoblin story, although it's not as epic as you would have hoped it would be.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, so like Kingsley is gone. I mean, we'll talk about some of the more modern stuff with him, but it is a little shocking to me that they let this character sit for so long. You know, I mean, they had really successfully brought him back and wrapped all that up, and then, you know, kind of put him out to pasture. I mean, I can't really think of many other villains that like were treated in this way, but maybe that was just it. The Hobgoblin is a thorn you just don't want to prick, or however you want to put it.
Yeah. So, do we want to talk a little bit about where the character is today, just before we kind of get into the ultimate legacy of the character?
Sure, yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. So, I mean, as we kind of alluded to earlier, Kingsley's, when I today, like, in 2021 terms, Kingsley is kind of, his main shtick is he's selling the like villainous IPs to loser bad guys to kind of, make a profit. And, that's coming on the heels of in the Axis storyline. Remember that thing, Dan?
Yeah,
He,
Kevin
he,
Shinnick.
he had a Yeah, Kevin Shinnick had like a brief little like heroic or anti-hero turn where he was actually selling good guy properties to people. But I mean I mean that never really got explored all that much. But like like pretty much if you see someone out there wearing the Grizzly costume or Mindworm or any of those guys that we had talked about from the Bronze Age. Their IP is owned by Kingsley, and he's selling them off. Of course, kind of leading up to that point, Kingsley was used a bunch during the Dan Slott era, although with controversial results, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, he's introduced in a way like we see him kind of going into one of the old Green Goblin layers to get some tech. And, you know, first time we'd seen him in a very long time. And he's killed off by Phil Urich almost immediately. And I think a lot of people were really upset, like, hey, like, we love this character. How dare you kill him off in such a perfunctory way, right? Like the Hobgoblin is a beloved villain, despite his kind of lack of presence in the books. And, you know, Slott meant to kill Roderick Kingsley, but in responding to the kind of backlash, he was approached with, I forget who threw the idea at him, that like, wait a minute, you have a perfect backdoor to this. It wasn't Roderick Kingsley. It was Daniel Kingsley, further again brainwashed by the Hobgoblin to be doing this. Now, the one thing that doesn't hold up is that you know, to get into the Goblin lair, the Hobgoblin like tears down the iron door, and Daniel Kingsley, as far as we know, never got the Goblin serum. So I think I can't remember specifically if Slott wrote in like some reason for that he was able to do it, but like, as far as I'm concerned, I don't care. I think it was a clever way out, like, to like trick people again. And I think that that kind of thing is now like essential part of the Hobgoblin character, is the like mistaken identities, and that he'll never go away. And I appreciated it. Like, even if it wasn't his intent, how we got to the ultimate place we did, I thought was really fun.
Right. I think it's for better or for worse at this point, but yeah, I agree. And then of course, Nick Spencer in his ultimate "I must fix" mentality, we finally get the answer to that question about Ned Leeds' Hobgoblin being offed so easily by the foreigner. Well, actually, it was more with the motivation for Spencer's turn with Leeds was because he got punched out by Flash, or was it the foreigner? I'm trying to remember.
I think it's more like, how did Ned Leeds survive all of that? So like we saw Ned Leeds have his throat slit, but Spencer had his throat heal because he actually took the Goblin serum, I think, so that he could fight Flash again.
Yeah, because he was embarrassed that he got punched out by Flash.
Right.
So it was like, and because he was brainwashed into thinking he was the Hobgoblin, he needed to take the serum to fight back against Flash. I mean, whatever. We'll see how much of this stuff in the long run from Spencer's run is still kind of honored as continuity, but like, and not to keep crapping on Spencer's run, but like this kind of reminded me of yet another instance of like Nick Spencer trying to fix something that nobody was asking him to fix at
Yeah.
this point. I mean, Ned Leeds as a turn as the Hobgoblin was dead and buried in my opinion, and it's kind of complicates it and muddies it a little bit in my opinion. So
I will admit, I love Roderick Kingsley as the costumer of villains. I think that's a perfect place for the character to have landed. I mean, would I like to see him flying around town as the Hobgoblin again? Yeah, but like he was always an enterprising, corporate businessman guy, and he's also a fashion designer. I just think it's a perfect melding of the two worlds, and it fits totally with the character. And I wish more was done with it, but I also think that enough people know about it that like they've commented here and there, like when someone gets unmasked and they're not the Grizzlies' original secret identity, which I can't tell you off the tip of my tongue who the Grizzly is. But I do think at least they're honoring it as much as I would love the character to have more kind of prominence in Spider-Man's rogue gallery.
yeah, I will say, and like if memory serves me, I mean, we're going way back in the time machine here, Dan. But like I remember there was an issue of Superior Spider-Man that involved Roderick Kingsley and kind of more of this like body doubles and brainwashing and stuff. And I remember you saying at the time like, I don't know, like if we keep doing this as like the out for this character, it does cheapen it over time. So like, do you feel that at this point? I mean, or do you feel like there's still legs to having the character constantly kind of get a one up on somebody because it's like, well, no, it's a double or it's someone I brainwashed or whatever. You know what I mean? Like there always seems to be, and it's kind of like the Jackal at this point. Like like how many different groundskeepers, Scooby Doo style, are you going to unmask and have it be somebody else when it comes to the Hobgoblin and Roderick Kingsley?
Well, you took the words right out of my mouth, which is like, I'm okay with it so long as we don't get to the point of it being the Jackal. I mean, I do
Yeah.
think it's humorous now that like they've leaned so far into it with the Jackal that there are hundreds of Professor Warrens, and that is like a funny acknowledgement that it's gotten really silly. I don't want the Hobgoblin to get to that point. I thought that the Daniel switcheroo in the Dan Slott run was really clever. But I think beyond that, I'm kind of like, with the death of Daniel, I'm kind of ready for the death of this alternate identity thing existing. And I thought that we moved past that. I don't remember the specifics of the Superior Spider-Man issue, although I recognize that you're right. That did happen, and I do recall faintly saying something like that. It might just come down to execution issue to issue
Right.
for me. I mean, like, I would love to see Roderick back. I do think if you're gonna play cheekily off of it and it's a smartly crafted twist of the knife, sure, I'm okay with the multiple personalities or multiple stand-ins thing. Especially now that he's got this company that can dress up people. There's always a smart way to do it, I think. But you're right. It's not the first thing I would lean into if I was depicting the Hobgoblin.
Right. Now, Dan, you have made it no secret on this show. I mean, I I will admit, my part of my fascination with the Hobgoblin, I mean, I am a former newspaper reporter, journalist, and I love the behind the scenes drama. I think for me, the behind the scenes drama of this character trumps even my actual opinions of the character itself. And I know that's a controversial thought, but that's where I'm at. For you, you seem to be a legitimate fan of the character first. So, we've done 3 episodes about this character now that have kind of gotten into the nitty gritty of some editorial drama and creator drama. Does this cheapen that fandom you have for Hobgoblin, or does it make you more emboldened in your fandom?
I mean, I can acknowledge when something is like a mess. And you said as much. Like the second chapter of this that we kind of covered last episode is a mess. And I think left at that point, my fandom for the Hobgoblin probably would have dried up. And again, I can only approach this fandom as somebody who can read all these things in a weekend if I really wanted to, rather than having to
Mm.
like suffer through years of this. Like would I have to ask myself, would I love Kindred if I could read it in a weekend? I don't think so because I don't think it's well written.
I'm like, where are you going with this, Dad?
No, Mark, I would never betray you like that. But so like I'm looking back on this like hindsight is 2020, so to speak. But like for me, that middle chapter is actually kind of what I love about the character. But only because of what was done in Hobgoblin Lives. Like, I really think that Roger Stern pulled off a miracle with Hobgoblin Lives and makes all of that stuff look brilliant in hindsight. And, the thing I wanted to push back on earlier that I said I would push back on eventually is like, to me, going from the beginning of the Roger Stern run with the Hobgoblin straight into Hobgoblin Lives would have been great and a nice tight story. But like, there's a sort of like, at least for me as a fan of the character, there's a sort of like meta character arc, which I kind of talked about last episode, which is like, there's a really strong beginning, and like any kind of character story, it gets messy in the middle, and then it all kind of comes together in the end. And I kind of
Right.
feel that with the Hobgoblin, which is like the messy middle is kind of the fun of it, and that the end is so perfect. I mean, it's whatever. It's leave them with their mouths open in the end, or whatever, wowed in the end. And I think this pulls it off. And as such, like, I don't think there's any villain in Spider-Man's history that has given me quite the same ride as the Hobgoblin has. He's a real threat, and he's really unusual, and he's not treated with kids' gloves. He's just legitimately heartless and murderous, and I don't know. I just think he's such a great villain for Spider-Man, and he's the one like villain that we kind of see so much of the connection and drama between the characters build up over such a long period of time. Like I can only imagine Venom if Eddie Brock was given this kind of treatment. That I would have that kind of attachment to it. But yeah, I don't know, and I just love the design of the character, and all of that is derivative of other characters, I'll admit. But there's just something about him that I connect to, and it's probably part of it is the messy like nerdiness of like what you were describing, which is like I love the behind the scenes stuff too, and that makes it almost like a more personal for me because like not many
Right.
people know about all that stuff, which is why I'm getting into fights with 40-year-olds in comic book stores. But
Can you stop calling out as 40-year-olds? They're just idiots. And I am 40 and I am not fighting with you.
all you
So
Gen
let's
Xers want to come at me.
yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, I don't know. Is that convincing at all? I mean,
I see what you're saying. I think the point I was trying to make. I mean, you're right. I mean, in retrospect, no. I mean, if Stern kind of ended his run with Hobgoblin Lives, it would have just been kind of like, oh, okay. But like, I do feel like, you know, this storyline and frankly, like what we experienced on ASM over the last couple of years. I mean, like, like I, I kind of just want creators to take a moment about these like very long running mystery arcs because I just feel like the longer you drag these things out, the more there is potential for it to kind of go off the rails a little bit. And I do think there is something to be said when you look at Hobgoblin Lives. I mean, for all of this drama and behind the scenes betrayal and chicanery, like what they actually did here with this story was write a very tight three-part storyline that just explains it all, and it's very effective and it's very well done, and like there's a mystery and then the mystery is solved and we all moved on with our lives. And like I think like you if you're gonna do I guess my point is, if you're gonna do a mystery arc in Spider-Man or any comics, but we're obviously Spider-Man focused. It's like, I think you kind of need to look at Hobgoblin Lives as like your end game. Like this is like at some point you need to have all the pieces in place to sum this all up and clear this all up as effectively as Stern does in this series, because otherwise you're just gonna piss people off. And kind of how we were really ticked off by how the Spencer run ended. Like, let's just, like, you just need something kind of tight but not rushed, and get it out there, and like, think about this as your end game when you're starting something. I guess that's the point I'm trying to make at the end of the day.
I just love that, like, Stern made it. There's not a single dangling thread at the end of this. It is all
That's
closed
what I mean.
up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, you could just, yes, we got Goblins at the Gate, and yes, we got future stories. And Stern, when I interviewed him for that CBR story I did back in the day, he said to me, I could always come up with another Kingsley story. And I'm sure he can, like, it's not, there's never truly an end in comics, but if there was going to be an end, he wrote an end. And I think there's something to be celebrated in that. Like, it's very rare in comics to have a true end in a way where it feels like an end, but there's still possibility for more.
And, people have used him since then. I think the use of him has been very up and down. There are writers that I think don't understand the character at all, like Brian Michael Bendis.
Yes.
And there are writers that I think do really cool things with him. I think Dan Slott mostly did neat things with him. I mean, literally returning to that beach and having him, come back, from Mexico out of retirement. And, I thought that was cool. I think as much as I would love to see him, a sparing use of the Hobgoblin is something I would love in Spider-Man comics. And if we never see him again, I've got these great stories to fall back on. And what's great about an ending, Mark?
What's that, Dan?
We can end our conversation about the Hobgoblin here. Like, we did it all in one fell swoop. We got the Hobgoblin out of our system.
There we go.
And, no one will ever ask us about the Hobgoblin again. That's probably not true because we love the Hobgoblin. But
I was going to say, we will never talk about him again, right?
That's
Dan?
it, right? Memory hole Roderick Kingsley. It's
go.
all here,
all right.
Everybody. I mean, we do hope that you guys all felt like we did justice to the Hobgoblin saga over these past 3 episodes.
I mean, I hope so, Dan. So, Dan, take us to the Caribbean, Dan.
Yeah, right. So if you find this show entertaining and valuable, I mean, like I said, I hope you did. One of the things that you can consider doing is supporting us. That might just mean recommending Amazing Spider Talk to a friend. I mean, recently, Spotify just opened up reviews, and we don't have any reviews on Spotify. So go in there and give us 5 stars, everybody, if you really love us. But if you really, really love us and you want more of what we do and you want us to keep going, why not consider becoming a member on our Patreon?
Yeah, we can only bring you this content with the support of our Patreon members, and we owe the show's success to every single one of them. And we constantly make exclusive content for our members. This week, Patreon members will hear Dan and I talk about Amazing Spider-Man number 84.
Yeah, so why not take that $3.99, the price of a new comic, and put it towards a month's subscription to support the show and start receiving our Patreon content. Like Mark said, that way you'll hear our Patreon exclusive review podcasts on every new issue of Amazing Spider-Man the same week they come out, instead of waiting for them to arrive on our public podcasting feed 3 months later when they're on Marvel Unlimited. If you're someone that goes to the comic book store and buys Amazing Spider-Man the week they come out, the Patreon is where you want to be.
Yeah, if you contribute $10 a month, Dan, you gain access to exclusive artwork from famous Spider-Man artists commissioned exclusively for our members. Plus, every episode we release a new episode-specific desktop background created for us by artist Nick Cagnetti for our patrons to enjoy.
Yeah, but with like Omicron spreading around the globe and everybody kind of living in a bit of panic, we know it's a hard time for everybody. So don't support us if it's going to cause you any hardship. You can just listen and share the show with your friends. But again, if you do have the means, please join our Patreon and support the continued existence of our show. You can do so by following a link in the description of this episode. And that goes to say, like, thank you to everybody who already makes this show possible. Mark and I don't profit off of our Patreon. It all goes back into the show. And I'll admit it's often tight because it does take a lot to keep this going. So we appreciate everybody who helps us out with the show.
Yes, Dan. But it is that time, unfortunately, time for these good things to come to an end. So we want to say thank you to you, the listeners and viewers, for tuning in to this episode of The Amazing Spider Talk.
Yeah, as always, this episode was edited by Rick Coast. Our artwork comes handcrafted by some of the artists we mentioned today: Ron Frenz, Sal Buscema, Ray Sumser, and Nick Cagnetti. And our theme songs were produced by our good friends Rylan Bojack and Spider Madge. Plus, our intro animation and musical stinger comes from our friend Josh Sutton from the YouTube show Panels to Pixels.
Dan, this last 3 episodes were a lot of fun. We're talking about our favorite character here, the Hobgoblin. I mean, do we have anything else to be talking about in our next episode or what?
Yeah, we're going to finish up the season with an episode that I'm really excited about because, Mark, it's one of your favorites, and I can't wait because we've not really, you and I, even just personally, have never really talked about this in any great detail. It's Marvel Superheroes Secret Wars. It's the story that will bridge us into our next season with Ron Frenz and Tom DeFalco's run on the character. Mark, Secret Wars, are you excited?
Oh my goodness. I mean, like this is Secret Wars is the book that kind of turned me onto Marvel as a kid. I am admittedly one of those kids that bought action figures and saw all these toys and then saw the comics and read the comics and then all of a sudden was like, I love all these characters, but especially that Spider-Man guy, and the rest is history.
Are you going to break out those old action figures? Do you still have those things?
I mean, I certainly do, Dan. I mean, I still have the figures, but the what I don't have anymore, and I had it, was like Doom's Castle. I had it all, Dan.
Oh,
like,
no.
I mean, like, if you went back to my parents' house, I mean, at one point in time, you would have found the entire Secret Wars cadre of figures. Like Jim Shooter had his hooks in me all the way, man.
Well, I'm expecting some special guests on the next show then.
I will do my best to get everyone out there.
That would be awesome. All right. Well, so, hey, if you're tuning in live, don't forget, as soon as the show ends, our conversation will continue with our audience on YouTube. And if you missed out on Amazing Spider Talk Live this time, we'll be back soon on YouTube. So go there and subscribe and click on the bell to stay on top of all the new live recordings that we'll be doing in the future. But, Mark, until next time, we have to leave everyone with our motto, the very thing that forms the background of our show. So, Mark, until I put on a toupee and pretend to be you, what's our motto?
But you're not my twin, Dan.
I'm not. I want to be clear.
Yes, you're not a twin. But, what a twin or not a twin would say still, our motto, which is, with great podcasts, there must also come the Amazing Spider Talk.